Sample deck. It can be manipulated via cue points, parameters, and auto set features to record sequences to make a new composition. The sample deck works with audio files such as MP3, WAV, AIFF, and other file types. Serato Studio comes with a large library of high-quality samples found in the Audio Samples tab in the library. You will continue to receive new samples with your subscription. You can also load audio samples from your Serato DJ Library tab. Once a sample is loaded into the sample deck, it can be manipulated via cue points, parameters, and auto set features to record sequences to make music. You can also use your own audio and drum samples in the sample deck. To load an audio sample in the sample deck, go to the Audio Sample tab in the library. There you will see the All Audio Samples loop crate. Then you will see subcrates with different types of genres. When you click on one of them, you'll find different audio sample loops. Select the one that you like and then click and drag it into the sample deck. You will notice that the sample deck will be highlighted in purple as you load the sample. When the sample is loaded into the sample deck, you will see a view of the waveform along with the metadata information such as name, artist, BPM, and key. You will also see that the BPM gives the original tempo of the sample, but sync will be turned on, which will time stretch the sample to fit the tempo of the session. This ensures everything that you load will be in time with your project. You can also half or double time the sample so that it's slower or faster, but still in time with your project. You also have the option to turn sync off, but it's possible that the tempo of the sample will not work with the project. Sometimes it's possible to do creative manipulation of samples with sync off. BPM and key in the library. There you will see the All Audio Samples loop crate. Then you will see subcrates with different types of genres. When you click on one of them, you'll find different audio sample loops. Select the one that you like and then click and drag it into the sample deck. You will notice that the sample deck will be highlighted in purple as you load the sample. When the sample is loaded into the sample deck, you will see a view of the waveform along with the metadata information such as name, artist, BPM, and key. You will also see that the BPM gives the original tempo of the sample, but sync will be turned on, which will time stretch the sample to fit the tempo of the session. This ensures everything that you load will be in time with your project. You can also half or double time the sample so that it's slower or faster, but sync will view the waveform. You will notice that the sample deck will be highlighted in purple as you load the sample. When the sample is loaded into the sample deck, you will see a view of the waveform along with the metadata information such as name, artist, BPM, and key. You will also see that the BPM gives the original tempo of the sample, but sync will be turned on, which will time stretch the sample to fit the tempo of the session. This ensures everything that you load will be in time with your project. You can also half or double time the sample so that it's slower or faster, but still in time with your project. You also have the option to turn sync off, but it's possible that the tempo of the sample will not work with the project. Sometimes it's possible to do creative manipulation of samples with sync off. Once the sample is loaded to the sample deck, you will notice that 8 automatic cue points are placed along the timeline of the audio sample. This is done by the Find Samples Auto Set feature. This feature searches for parts of the sample that will work well together for playing to record a sequence. You can play the cue points using your computer's keyboard, a MIDI controller, or a Serato DJ approved controller or mixer. If you do not like the cue points, you can click on the Find Samples Auto Set feature to generate another set of 8 cue points. The sample deck will search the sample to find additional parts to work together. Please note, there are other auto set features such as Set Random and Slicer, and also Serato DJ, the latter which will allow you to use your cue points from your Serato DJ files. If you find cue points that you like, you can favorite them by individually pressing the favorite for each of the cue points. You will see a star appear for each of the individual cue points that you favorite. If you press Find Samples, note, there are other auto set features such as Set Random and Slicer, and also Serato DJ, the latter which will allow you to use your cue points from your Serato DJ files. If you find cue points that you like, you can favorite them by individually pressing the favorite for each of the cue points. You will see a star appear for each of the individual cue points that you favorite. If you press Find Samples after setting favorites, new cue points will appear while favorite cue points will remain in the same place. To remove a favorited cue point, select the cue point and press the star to unfavorite the cue point. There are 2 different play modes for cue points, hold and trigger. When hold is selected, the audio for the cue point will play as long as you press the cue point. When you let go of the cue point, the audio will stop. This is great for playing shorter samples. When trigger is selected, the audio for the cue point will play continuously without holding the cue point. The audio will change and continue to play when the next cue point is pressed. This is great to use for playing longer portions of a sample. This is also how the cue points behave in Serato DJ. For each cue point, you can set an endpoint to truncate the playback of the sample. At the bottom of the cue point in the sample, you will see an anchor. If you click and drag on the anchor, you can move and set the anchor to a place of your choosing. When you play back the cue point, it will only play from the beginning of the cue point start to the end where the anchor is placed. This is great for playing certain parts of the sample for particular phrasing. For cue points, you can play them in mono or poly. In mono playback, you will only be able to play 1 cue point at a time. As soon as you play another cue point, the first cue point will be cut off. In poly mode, for playback of cue points, you can play multiple cue points at the same time without having any of them getting cut off. This is great for layering sounds. In keyboard mode, you have the option to play a particular sound on a cue point over 88 keys for the full keyboard octave ranges. When you choose the cue point, you can click on the piano symbol, which will spread the sound over the 88 keys. If you're using your computer's typing keyboard, you can use the letters shown on the sample deck to play the notes in the octave range. If you want to change the octave range to go higher, press the letter X. To change the octave range to go lower, press the letter Z. You can play keyboard mode in mono or poly. With poly, you have the option to play chords. If you don't have any music theory, you can press play in key to ensure that the keys you play will play in the key of your project. You can also use a MIDI keyboard to trigger the notes. As well, you can use an approved Serato DJ controller with pads to trigger the notes. If the controller has parameter buttons, you can use the left and right parameter buttons to decrease or increase the octave ranges respectively. The sample sequencer is simple and yet powerful for creating sequences in your deck. When using a sample deck, a sample sequencer will appear with 8 notes, 1 per cue point. Each note will be the same color as the cue point. The color of the cue point represents the frequency of sound. Darker colors represent lower frequencies, warmer colors represent mid-range frequencies, and brighter colors represent high frequencies. When you play the cue points in the sample deck, they will also trigger in the sample sequencer. When you record a sequence, you will see the notes appear in the sample sequencer. To record a sequence using your computer keyboard, you can use the keys on your keyboard to trigger the notes. Once recorded, you can shorten or extend the notes by placing the cursor at the beginning or the end of the note by using the brackets to click and drag on the note to make the adjustment. You can also draw on notes by clicking and dragging along the grid. To select notes, hold down Shift on your keyboard and make the selection by clicking and dragging. This allows you to duplicate, delete, cut, copy, or paste the notes easily. You can move your notes off grid by clicking and dragging them. When moving a note off grid, it will maintain its off-grid position. Another way to achieve off-grid notes and to add a more human feel to your sequence is to use the swing knob. Turning this up will swing every second note in the swing grid to play back later. To increase the scene size, click the plus button next to the scene size display. Scenes can be up to 32 beats in length, which is 8 bars. By default, when you start a track, you will be given 1 bar. If you want to extend the note past the first bar into the second bar or any bar after that, you can use the cursor at the end of the note and use the right bracket to click and drag the note into the second page or the pages following. When the deck sequencer is collapsed, you will see a waveform representation of the MIDI notes that were played. The rendered waveforms are dynamic, representing the frequencies of the audio based on the sample. To expand the view of the sample sequencer, click the deck collapse button in between the sample deck and the sample sequencer. This will allow you to see the sample sequencer in a wider view. The sample deck will disappear when the sample sequencer is made wider. To return back to the original view of the sample deck and the sample sequencer, click the deck show button to the left of the expanded sample sequencer. So that's how you use the sample deck and the sequencer inside of Serato Studio. Have fun creating music, and make sure you check out www.serato.com/studio to learn more. In this video, I'm going to take you through using the scenes and building a song inside the program. I'm going to cover all the basics of what you need to know to get up and running right away to start your beat. Let's go. Scenes are a collection of your sample, drum, and instrument sequences. They are a vertical slice of your song. For example, intro, main beat, or chorus of your song. Each sample, drum, or instrument deck that you add will have a sequence belonging to each scene. The scene player gives you the option to add drums, samples, or instruments. When you click on any of those tabs, you'll be given a blank deck that you can populate with drums, audio samples, or instruments. For each of the decks, you will see a speaker icon next to the name of the deck. The speaker icon is for mute. When you press it, you will mute the deck. If you want to solo the deck, hold down Shift and the mute speaker icon will turn to an S. S is for solo. When you click on S, you'll be able to solo the deck. You can also change the size of the grid for note recording. You can also clear all notes if needed. Please note that mute is not scene specific, so if you have a deck on mute in one scene, it will be mute in the other scenes too. If you want a deck to be quiet in one scene but not another, clear the sequence of the deck in the scene that you want to remove it from. Alternatively, you can use automation to make volume and parameter changes across an individual scene. All scenes are 1 bar by default. It is possible to expand scenes up to 32-beat scenes in length, which is 8 bars. At the top of the sequencer, there's a tab to increase and decrease the number of bars. When you increase the number of bars, the notes for each of the decks you have in the scene will duplicate. Once duplicated, you can go to each bar and make note changes. Scenes can make up sections of a song. For example, scene 1 by default will be the intro to your song. You will see the scene pads underneath the sequence player section. To add additional scenes, you can click on an empty slot and be given 2 options. The first option is copy, which will allow you to copy the previous scene that you're working with. The second option is empty, which will give you an empty scene to start adding in decks of your choice without any previously written notes. As you make new scenes for parts of the song like verse, chorus, bridge, breakdown, drop, and outro, you can double-click on the scene to rename it to whatever part of the song it is. To expand the view of the sequencer, click on the Collapse Deck button in between the drum, sample, or instrument deck and the sequencer to see the sequencer in a wider view. The drum, sample, or instrument deck will disappear when the sequencer is made wider. To return back to the original view of the drum, sample, or instrument deck and the sequencer, click the Expand Deck button to the left of the expanded sequencer. Once you have all your scenes created, you can create a song in Song View. To get to Song View, click on the tab to the right of the library. Once in Song View, you can click and drag on a scene and drop it into the timeline of the Song View. As you start to populate the Song View, you can zoom in or zoom out on the timeline. In the top right corner of the Song View, there are zoom in and zoom out buttons that will allow you to zoom. To play the song, press the play tab. Pressing it a second time will stop the music. You can also move the playhead along the timeline to play the song from a specific point. As you build your song, you'll notice a live updating waveform display in the master track as you play it through. This is to give you a visual reference of your song, so you can see if it's too quiet, has too much bass, or just easily to identify each part of the song. You can select the master track to see an even larger version of the master waveform. This is also where you can apply mixer settings, effects, and plugins to your master track. As you do this, you'll see the change of the waveform in real time. Song structure generally repeats in 4, 8, 16, and 32 bar phrases, depending on the style of music that you're making. For example, in most hip-hop songs, the intro is generally 8 bars, the verses are generally 16 bars, the choruses are generally 8 bars, and the outros are also generally 8 bars. These numbers can generally double for house music and other styles of dance music. Once you have completed the song in Song View, you can go to File to export the song. The song will export as a 16-bit, 44.1 kHz WAV file. You also have the option to export files for each of your decks. This option can be found when you click on Export Song in the File tab. Files will be exported as 16-bit, 44.1 kHz WAV files. Exporting stems is useful for taking your song and continuing to finish it in another application. Or if you need to send your song to a sound engineer to get mastered.
Alright, that's how you build scenes and build a song inside of Serato Studio. Have fun creating music. And make sure you visit www.serato.com/studio to learn more. In this video, I'm going to take you through using KeySync inside the program. I'm going to cover all the basics of what you need to know to get up and running right away to start your beat. Check it out.
KeySync is one of the amazing features of Serato Studio that makes using various samples and different keys work together with ease. By default, when Serato Studio is opened, it is set to the key of C minor. You'll notice that drum kits do not have a key, so they do not set the key of the session. When loading a sample to a sample deck, the key of the session will be set. For example, if the sample loaded is in A minor, the session will be set to A minor from C minor. The project key and the project scale can be changed to any key and scale, thus adjusting the key and scale of the sample. When another sample is added to a new sample deck, if the sample is not in the same key, it will automatically key sync to lock into the key of the session. In the sample deck, key sync will automatically be turned on. It is possible to turn key sync off if you wish to adjust the key of the sample to your liking. You also have the option to detune the sample to correct the tuning if it's slightly out of tune, or if you want to play the sample out of tune on purpose. When using multiple samples, KeySync is extremely helpful for having different samples work together. You do not manually have to transpose each of the samples, which saves a lot of time and makes the creative process more fun and intuitive. This is really great when using acapellas to do a remix. Not only will the acapella key sync to the tempo of the session, but it will also key sync too.
Let's get it crunk up on that fun up in this dancery. We got y'all open, now you're low, so you got to dance for me. Don't need no hateration, holleration in this dancery. Let's get it percolated, fire weighted, so just dance for me.
When using an instrument deck or a plugin deck with play and key turned on, the keys will play in the key of the session. If you do not have any music theory knowledge, play and key will help you play the notes in the key of the session, thus keeping the creative flow moving quickly. When changing the project key or the project scale, the entire session will transpose together. This lets you remix or completely change the vibe of your song in seconds. Try this in combination with adjusting the BPM to give some new light to older projects.
So that's how you use KeySync inside of Serato Studio. Have fun creating music. And make sure you visit www.serato.com/studio to learn more. In this video, I'm going to take you through using DJ hardware and using MIDI keyboards with Serato Studio. I'm going to cover all the basics of what you need to know to get up and running right away to start working on your beat.
You can use supported Serato DJ hardware to make music with Serato Studio. DJ controllers are very popular and vary in range and size from different manufacturers such as Roland, Pioneer, Denon DJ, and Newmark. For example, the Roland DJ 202 controller is great to use with Serato Studio.